Great. So I'm hopefully they asked me to give a little bit of a background and overview. So in thinking about kind of the idea of cash transfers, and for those of you that were in the session yesterday, we had a good session on behavioral economics, and there was some important data presented that both our team and Quraisha Abdul's Kareem presented from CAPRISA. So clearly cash has gotten a lot of buzz of late, particularly in the prevention and care field. This was a cover that the Economist did, I think, last year. And I know for myself as a researcher and others, we kind of came to this because from a lot of our work in sub-Saharan Africa with young women, seeing that really some of these upstream drivers of risk were really important. So things like education in particular, poverty, gender power, and inequality, and thinking about kind of ways that we could intervene at that level to help young women reduce their risk. This is a slide from the bank, thanks to David. I think just re-emphasizing that in many places that we work, clearly poverty and inequality are huge, and in the places like sub-Saharan Africa where we see the epidemic hit hardest, clearly poverty is a major issue. As I said, I think cash has gotten a lot of buzz, and I have to say that since the cash transfers and behavioral economics and incentives have sort of come on the scene in the prevention and both for ART adherence, the mainstream media has picked up on this a lot. I think I was saying that hopefully we can talk more about this, but it seems like an easy fix in some ways. Oh, we can just give people money. We don't have to deal with that messy behavior change stuff, and we're going to see these great effects. I think it's proving that life isn't that simple. So we did a review in 2012. At the time, there were 16 studies looking at cash for prevention, and the way I sort of see it is, we sort of dichotomized it in this way of having both what I see as these upstream programs, which we have Craig McClure, who's going to talk really nicely about social protection, and then I think UNICEF and development organizations have really pioneered this idea of poverty alleviation. So the idea that if we can provide cash to people, that we can help, help people go to school, help reduce poverty, which therefore will downstream reduce HIV risk. I think we also have a category of interventions that I think fall in the category somewhat of behavioral economics or contingency management from psychology, which is this idea that, if we give you cash to come in to test, or cash if you test negative for STIs, so sort of this cash for an immediate behavior change. I see that as sort of the downstream approach, very sort of proximate to what we're asking you to do. So I think there are questions about, do both approaches work the same way in different populations, and what are the implications for scale up? I think particularly some of the bank studies, and David will say that particularly one of the studies done in Lesotho, where they were providing cash for negative STI tests. I think thinking about how that would get implemented at scale is probably not something that would happen, but more proof of concept around the idea that cash can perhaps invoke behavior change. So this is just a little schematic in thinking about young girls. There's a lot of pathways through which we might hypothesize that cash could reduce risk. We were wanting to keep girls in school in the HPTN-068 study. The idea that money can help girls go to school, which would reduce risk, or might help them think about a brighter future, or might help them in the future in terms of better work prospects. But there's also a pathway of saying if young women have money, perhaps it will defer transactional sex or their dependence on male partners, and that may be a pathway that reduces risk. And certainly some of the studies that have been done have suggested that. So these are 3 trials that have been done by the bank. The Malawi trial, these are all randomized trials, and the Malawi study done in Zambia with young women showed a really big effect on HIV prevalence. So girls who got cash, it was a complex study, but both the conditional and unconditional arm, when grouped together, they saw a reduction not only in HIV prevalence, but also in a number of risk behaviors that seemed to suggest that cash changed kind of the partner selection characteristics. But also the RESPECT trial in Tanzania, which was a lottery, and also the Lesotho trial, which had incidence as an endpoint, again, showing that these lotteries could reduce HIV risk in these 2 settings. I think the other study that has gotten a lot of attention is Lucy Kluver's work examining the child support grant in South Africa, where she looked at households getting the child support grant and then looking at adolescents in those households, and saw that girls in households getting the cash were less likely to report age-disparate sex and also less likely to report transactional sex. Again, observational data. I think another intriguing idea in the wake of both the CAPRISA and the 068 trial is this idea of cash plus care. So I think what was very appealing when Zamba came out was this idea that we didn't have to talk about HIV. We didn't say anything about HIV. We just provided this cash and saw these amazing prevention benefits. So maybe, you know, social protection might have really big HIV prevention benefits. But I think here, again, looking at observational data from South Africa, what Lucy sees is that, you know, in homes getting the cash, you see a reduced risk of risk behaviors. But if you looked at homes getting the cash plus other things like I think there were things like food gardens and also sort of like school protection programs, having mentors, that those things as well reduced the risk even further. So I think this idea of cash plus care is something intriguing to think more about. Yesterday in the session, there's been some interesting work presented here at IAS. So Harsha Thuramanthi presented data on cash to improve the uptake of male circumcision, and that's been shown to work. The lottery, perhaps not so much, but certainly cash to come in has been shown to improve the uptake of male circumcision. There also was data presented by Marcel Yotabiang around cash to improve retention in PMTCT and the DRC. And I think we also have some good observational data showing that cash has improved uptake of testing. From Cape Town, Linda Gale Becker's site has looked at incentivized mobile testing, seeing that men who received cash were more likely to be first-time testers and to have had advanced disease compared to men not getting incentivized testing. So I think we have like sort of an increasing evidence base that certainly in terms of getting people into services, cash can help with that. For those of you that weren't in the session yesterday, the two big randomized trials that were both presented here at IAS with HIV incidence endpoints in young women, the CAPRISA trial. This was a study done in KwaZulu-Natal with cash incentives for testing, for school performance, participation in an education program, and it was associated with a reduction in HSV2. This was boys and girls in school. And they seemed to show in subgroup analyses that more money was associated with bigger reductions in risk. But they couldn't establish a relationship with HIV. So that question in that trial remains sort of unanswered, and we didn't see the behavioral data from that trial. This is our study in rural South Africa, HP 10068. It was a cash transfer condition on schooling for young women. We had about 2,500 young women in the trial, and it was a monthly payment both to the girl and the parent. And unfortunately, we also didn't see a reduction in HIV incidence in our trial. We did see some reductions in self-reported behavior, which is a little bit difficult to interpret when we don't see the change in HIV incidence. But school attendance, as we didn't expect, was high in both arms. 95% of girls in both arms stayed in school throughout the trial. School dropout was really low. Staying in school was protective, so for the girls that did drop out of school, we did see an increased incidence in that group. But I think this raises questions of just about, you know, that this is more complicated perhaps than we thought it would be. So I think, you know, for me, there's no, as we learn over and over again in the field, right, there's no magic bullet. We keep looking for, oh, this is new, shiny thing, and it's gonna solve our problems, but maybe that's not the case. So again, thinking hard about what's the purpose of the cash. You know, really, what are we trying to achieve? So programs aren't just saying, like in dreams, let's just do cash transfers. I think, you know, what are you trying to do with that cash? And really thinking about your context. I mean, there's multiple literature saying when we do structural interventions, we need to understand the context, and yet we all want an easy answer. So again, you know your epidemic, know what you're trying to do. Those messages come back again and again. I think we see another message coming out that targeting is important, that, you know, not everybody's going to need incentives for behavior change. So who do we give the money to? Who's going to benefit? And how long do you give the money for? Actually, much like PrEP, do you need to give this for a lifetime? Or is it, as we've called with PrEP for young women, a season of risk where we just need to provide this to get women through, or a particular group through, a high-risk period? How do we need to package it with care? And how does cash fit into combination prevention? I think we need to be doing some studies to think about that. And also, are there other forms of economic strengthening that we could be thinking about? You know, everyone talks about microfinance, and that kind of is like passé, but, you know, are there other things that we should be thinking about and doing if we really want to address, if we think poverty and young women's economic autonomy is important? So I'm going to stop there, and we're going to hear about both great overview of social protection, and then programs to improve couples testing, work with sex workers, and with both in Mexico and in Zimbabwe, and also drug users in Thailand. So we have a great lineup, and I'm going to stop and welcome Craig McClure from UNICEF.